Hey everyone, I am excited to share some fantastic news with all of you today. Registration is now open for the 11th Annual Prevention Summit, co-hosted by the Drug Free America Foundation and the Hillsborough County Anti-Drug Alliance. This transformative event is scheduled for February 19th and 20th, 2024 at the stunning Tradewinds Resort on St. Petersburg Beach. This year's summit is more than just a gathering. It's a milestone in our collective mission to combat substance abuse, increase access to treatment, and promote recovery services. Imagine a world where our communities are equipped with the knowledge, tools, and strategies to effectively prevent drug use and abuse. Because that's the vision and the heart of the Prevention Summit. New this year, we're introducing sessions dedicated to reducing marijuana use during pregnancy and postpartum. These sessions will delve into new trends, discuss the endocannabinoid system, and review current research on addiction, parenting, and effective communication strategies for safety and deterrence. So mark your calendars and join us at the 11th Annual Prevention Summit. Together, let's empower our communities and advocate for sound drug policies. To register, visit the link in the show notes. And I look forward to seeing you all at the Tradewinds Resort for an event that promises to be both enlightening and inspiring. So for today's podcast, joining us is Stacey Doorly Jones, the founder and CEO of STAND, a remarkable organization dedicated to supporting individuals with substance dependence in Cape Town, South Africa. Stacey's journey is one of incredible transformation, from a childhood marked by trauma and abuse to becoming a leading figure in harm reduction and support for the most vulnerable in society. In our conversation, Stacey shares her personal story of healing, the pivotal role of therapy in her life, and the impactful work of STAND. Insights on compassion, resilience, and the journey to recovery are not just moving, but deeply, deeply empowering. So whether you're looking for inspiration, understanding, or ways to support those in need, this episode is for you. So let's dive into this journey of healing and transformation with Stacey. The vision, a world where all people live free of the burden of drug abuse. This is the Drug Free America Foundation's Pathway to Prevention podcast, where we are committed to developing strategies that prevent drug use and promote sustained recovery. Thank you for not only tuning in, but your continued support and efforts to help make this world a better place. We hope you enjoy this episode. All right, podcast listeners, welcome back to another episode of the Pathways to Prevention podcast. I'm excited to welcome Stacey to our show today. Welcome, Stacey.
Thank you so much, Dave. A very, very big hello, and thank you so much. I'm so grateful for this opportunity today. Thank you.
I am excited and grateful that we've been able to connect, and I've enjoyed every minute of our conversations before hitting record. So I know, listeners, y'all are in store for a wonderful, wonderful conversation. But before we get into it, would you mind introducing yourself, particularly where are you located in this world and what do you do?
Thanks so much, Dave. So where am I located? So I'm Stacey Doorly Jones. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of a nonprofit organization called STAND. And I am right at the tip of Africa, beautiful, sunny Cape Town in South Africa. So, everybody comes from a context, Dave. And if I look at my journey, it really comes from a childhood of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, trauma, mental illness, gender-based violence, and substance dependence. And that really was my childhood. And I have been extremely privileged, despite having this childhood, to have access in my later life to support and help. I didn't know that I needed help and support until late into my 30s, when I actually started remembering things and realizing, what had actually happened to me. And I have very deep-seated, deep-rooted trauma. And I somehow, throughout my life, always had this compassion, this understanding, deep compassion for humans that turn to substances to take away the pain, to take away the trauma. And I've been told many, many times in my own journey to a healthy life, let's put it that way, to realizing who I am, is that somehow I'm an anomaly in that I should have been, as they would say, into progressed addiction, possibly homeless, in jail or dead. And I am enormously, enormously grateful for the fact that I am here and I'm able to do this work. And there is obviously a greater reason. I've never used, no, that's actually, no, let me not say that. Of course, I dabbled in drugs when I was a teen. I did dabble in drugs, but, not heavily, or, I smoked some marijuana and so on, tried it, and that was it. But I had a very beautiful group of friends who essentially became my family, in the 80s. I used to call us the feral kids that lacked family foundation, and we found family in one another. And very sadly, I have lost a few of those beautiful friends to substance addiction and overdose. And I have seen what it has done in my own family's life. I have seen the tears and the rips and the shredding. And I just have this enormous drive, this pull to help people that don't have access to the kind of help that I had to heal. And with the deep understanding of why, in most instances, they have turned to using substances. And so it makes me quite emotional, Dave, to think about it. Just listening to the stories, understanding over the years, many, many years, there is always a context. There is always a story behind why, and never ever just to take something at face value. Never. No judgment. Yeah.
Powerful. I love that you pointed out your compassion, empathy, and gratitude being so ingrained in your heart, in your soul as well. And I wonder if you might unpack that a little bit and share with us maybe some of the insights that you see as to why you considered yourself an anomaly, were able to heal.
So it's not really me that thought I was an anomaly. I throughout my years in counseling, and I have needed extensive counseling to get through to where I am today. And it's essentially 24 years of therapy to work through the trauma. I've been told by my therapist that I'm an anomaly. They don't understand, how it is that I'm doing what I'm doing and able to do what I'm doing. But there is a drive and there is a force that is something I cannot, it's not a tangible thing. I can't explain it. I can only say to you, I am driven. I am driven, and that energy and that love never, ever wavers. It never wavers when I see another human and I see the pain that is in their eyes. And so, I had to really work through a very broken down childhood. And I made a number of decisions in my life without having a foundation or a value system to measure anything by. And the lack of that, somehow I was able to just, I think it was just intrinsic within me that there was that compassion, that there was that love of people and animals, and to do no harm. I mean, that really drives my heart. And it's a very, very difficult thing for me to actually put a label on or to say where it comes from, because Dave, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know. But there have been many, many times where I've cried in pain and I have screamed at why do I have to see what I see? Why do I have to hear what I hear? Why am I in this? And in as much as I say that, I'm then faced with somebody that has healed or somebody that has just come through the worst trauma in their life. And they come to me and they say, oh, I need to tell you this, or just recap on the journey and what's happened to me and where I am now. And those are the types of things, Dave, that feed me. That feeds my soul. And it keeps me pushing when all the odds keep saying to me, just don't, you're compromising yourself and you're compromising your family and you're compromising, and somehow the family still holds me up. Everybody just holds me up and I'm still able to keep going by some miracle. So yeah, that's pretty much in a nutshell.
Well, that was beautiful. That was, and I can relate. So much of your story resonated with me, not because I have the same story, but some of those same feelings. They just kind of made me go, oh, yeah, that's kind of how I feel. I don't know how many times I've been asked, Dave, what gets you out of bed in the morning and gets you to your drive? Where does it come from? And I've never been able to put my finger on it and say, well, this is why I do what I do. This is what gets me out of bed. I just do it.
Just do it. Absolutely, Dave. And you know what? I think possibly it may be purpose. It's our purpose on this earth. Because if we're not able to articulate this, if we're not able to label it, and there's this continued drive every single day in a really hard, very hard part of life, I believe it's purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And earlier in my life, I got caught up in the comparison trap and felt like I never had a calling. I never I can't wait to go to college or university and be a doctor or an engineer. I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, but that bothered me, that stressed me out. And I finally came to this realization or acceptance that just be Dave. And go all in on being me and doing what I do and being who I am, and I will find my calling that way. And that has taken a lot of pressure off that I was putting on myself to know, what am I meant to do in this world, instead of trying to figure out what. Just do, just be.
And Dave, that resonates with me because I never knew. I didn't have the opportunity for any, post-school, college education. But I was asked so many times, what are your goals? What are your plans? And I could never ever say that. I could never articulate it. And through this journey, I have been, it's been told to me that, trauma, when you go through that extent of trauma, it is very, very difficult because you're living in the moment. You're in survival mode. And to be able to try to think beyond that is, it's almost an impossible thing to ask someone. And it took me breaking down this year in April, literally in a gibbering heap on the floor, and having to go to an inpatient treatment facility for complete burnout and exhaustion. And in there, I had the most incredible trauma release. I was taught the foundational things that I was never taught in childhood. And out of that, I actually started realizing pretty much what you were saying earlier on is just be me. Just be me and continue. And that's what I'm doing right now. That's what I'm doing.
This is an audio only podcast, but listeners, if it was video, you would see my face just beaming smile and energy. And Stacey, I felt a warmth come over my heart as you were sharing that story of just be me. Yes, like a warm hug. I love it.
Oh, Dave, don't make me cry on this podcast, please. I keep it together here.
There was another thread that you had kind of shared through your story that I kind of want to pull out and talk about just a little bit, if you don't mind. Part of my healing journey and growth is finding harmony with the seasons of life, in that I've shifted my mindset, my paradigm from having work-life balance, because things are never going to be in balance. It's going to be busy one way or the other, ebb and flow. And so accepting and embracing the harmony that is life. But then I also kind of had a realization when you were talking about you're going to therapy, in that my healing journey has been in seasons as well, in that different seasons of therapy, different healing steps along my journey. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that. I feel as though, and this is just my own thought, that oftentimes we think, oh, well, I went to therapy, I'm good, I'm fine. Or it's a one-time type of thing. But I want the world to know that it is a journey and there are steps and seasons. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, Dave. Oh my gosh, it is really walking a path. And I relate to this 100%. And, as I said to you earlier, how many years, 24, 25, 26 years in therapy. And I'm not talking consecutively. And that really links to what you're saying about, the journey, the seasons of healing is you work through something that you're really struggling with and you're trying to piece together. And it's almost like, a great therapist, dearly departed, who played such a significant role in my healing. He told me that this process is like Table Mountain in Cape Town. You climb up the side, you walk along the flat top, and then you walk down and you continue. The process each time, each season has a beginning, a journey, and an end. And then we're okay for a while, and then we need it again because we need to work through something. And that process, honestly and truly, is linked 100% to the journey of recovery for people with substance dependence, because obviously we're speaking within that context, but is that this is it's a journey, it's a road. You get one thing right, you get an amazing thing out of it, you get an incredible learning, you apply that, and life happens, life shifts, life morphs.
Mm-hmm.
And you then come across something else that you really struggle with. And then you need to tap into that again. And, whichever way that you're going to do it, you need to work through it to continue. And that is essentially certainly from my side, the journey of life. And it's only happened in the latter sort of 25 years. But yeah, Dave, and that is essentially, I'm so grateful that I've been able to walk that journey and, to those big challenges and learning how to overcome them. And in that journey, Dave, I'm able to impart to others what I have learned, not to apply my own context, but certainly to take the wisdom of the journey and be able to share that. And it's absolutely incredible how people have stopped and really listened. And to give you a perfect example is I was told you need, in this context of your life right now, to step back and observe quietly with kindness. And I realized by doing that, you take off whatever lens you are looking at someone through, be it through your own, whatever you're going through on that day, whatever's happened to you, whatever you're feeling about someone. If you are able to step back and observe quietly with kindness, you are able to see so much more. You're able to understand so much more. You're able to listen so much more. Yeah.
Oh, yes. And just as you were saying, you share your journey, not for the specific context. Yet again, I'm nodding and your story, what you're sharing is resonating oh so well with my own journey that I'm still on, of course. Yes. And the kindness that you mentioned to pause and be quiet and just observe with kindness. How that resonated with me was that I had to focus that kindness towards myself and just pause and let myself listen and let myself feel. A part of my trauma, I was compartmentalizing and trying to lock all my emotions in a box and not feel because I was in combat and I felt like that was a survival mechanism. But then back in the States, readjusting to civilian life, that didn't work. It was not feasible, not healthy. Yeah, I had to learn to let myself feel and then understand those feelings, process those feelings. Yeah. Well, I'm going to, yeah, I was kind of having a moment there. I was taking myself back to sitting on my couch with my journal, and just a big moment for my journey was right. Yeah. Okay. I'm back.
No, I need to just tell you, and I thank you so much for that, because you've just reminded me to step back and also look at myself with kindness. And I really appreciate that reminder. So thank you for sharing, Dave, from your side, because that's certainly something I have not been doing. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Self-love is something I don't feel is talked about or understood nearly enough, and it is so important. Well, we're 20 some odd minutes into this conversation, and it's been beautiful already, but we haven't even talked about stand. Can we take a right turn in this conversation, this journey, and tell our listeners about social transformation action defined?
Absolutely, Dave. Thank you. And I think, pretty much the reason is, I think it's just all, the whole thread just runs through. So it's just a natural transition. So essentially, social transformation actually defined, I know it's a very long, drawn out name, but we call it STAND, and pretty much stand action. And I love that word action, because it's very much around taking action. And if I put it in a nutshell, what do? We reduce harms to drug and alcohol dependent people. We walk a path with them to abstinence by reducing harms along the way. And you and I had a short discussion around that word harm reduction, which I hope we do come back to within the context of Stan's work. But just furthering on what it is that we do, we have a very special focus on women in remote regions, and youth in remote regions in the Western Cape of South Africa, because these are communities that are under-resourced, highly stigmatized and ostracized by their communities. And particularly, it's an incredibly patriarchal society within which they live in the rural regions. And hence the women are so deeply traumatized, and by extension, their children. And so what we do is really quite a long thread, really. We ensure that we link women and young people. We don't leave out the men, by the way, but there is a special focus on women because of the extent of suffering that they go through. We promote gender-centric and non-stigmatizing access to support, gender-based violence support, healthcare and treatment services. And when I say treatment services, I'm not saying in the rural regions, because there are none. And what we also do is we ensure that we capacitate and educate all sectors of government and civil society organizations on how to work with women and young people, and actually remove the harms, remove the stigma, remove the biases that they're seeing them through. And instead of them turning away, actually coming to them for help. And we also actively advocate for the removal of any barriers to treatment that exist, as well as we provide an early intervention, trauma-informed treatment service for primary and high school learners in the remote region of the Cape Winelands. So that's sort of stand in a nutshell, and it really spans along pretty much social development rather than, addressing one particular thing, because I don't think you can address anything in isolation. We're a society, and a person consists of so many different facets, and there's so many different angles that we need to work with in order to help somebody and to restore and help them heal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And why wait? Let's jump right into harm reduction.
Great.
Let's unpack your model for reducing the harms, your approach to harm reduction. Tell me all about it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dave. I'd spoken to Amy not so long ago, just obviously being on the various platforms, advocating for reducing harms, and that special word harm reduction, and how polarized it is, thrown around within the areas that we all work. And it became clear to me that the word harm reduction was largely associated with needle and syringe programs or overdose prevention sites or opiate agonist therapy. And within the work and the context of Stan's work, we don't have syringe using populations. It's pretty much, stimulant use, crystal meth. Heroin is smoked, rather than injected. And alcohol is, a hugely prevalent substance, and then moving into cannabis and crystal meth. And so the work within our context is essentially walking a path with a human being, walking a path to abstinence, but reducing harms along the way. And the way that we do that is, I'm not going to say twofold, I would just say it's manyfold. So the types of work that we have been doing, the nuts and bolts work, we do via various projects, and we do as a specific service, which is, to the youth. But I'll start in terms of the projects work. As we receive support and funding, we're able to do this work. So that would essentially mean, right, let's make sure that we directly link people who use drugs and alcohol, well, when I say use, are dependent on drugs and alcohol, to services that are not stigmatized, and that there's equitable access to these services. And obviously they rely on the government sectors, such as the Department of Health, the Department of Social Development, and the law enforcement. We call that in South Africa SAPS, South African Police Services. So in order to link them to these services and ensure that there's a mutual understanding and not a fear and not a stigmatization, we actually need to bring these parties together. But before we do that, we need to sensitize. And so where this reaches various levels is, I've learned through this process that we always need to work, because we're working within the sectors and the spheres of government services, that we need to get their buy-in. We need to get it from the top levels before we do anything. And we've been very lucky to be able to do this. People have just been willing to hear in the senior levels of government, and they've given their big tick box or, approval. And then we have been able to work downward. And so what we do, the process is we engage with community healthcare workers. And this is between civil society organizations that render healthcare, HIV, sexual reproductive healthcare services, and also the civil society organizations. And what we do is we ask them to engage with the women who they know are using drugs and alcohol in their communities. But this is only done after we have sensitized them. We've sensitized the community healthcare workers on how to engage without bias. And then what happens is we have a focus group. And this is, something that has been repeatedly done. And it has proved incredibly powerful and incredibly positive in terms of the outcomes, because first of all, nothing about us without us, which I'm quite sure, you've heard many, many times. And what you do in one area may not work in the other area. And you have to understand directly, in that whole sort of needs analysis, what is needed. And we've had the most incredibly powerful focus groups, with women in these remote regions. And they have felt safe. And, they've really exposed the deepest core of what is harming and hurting them. And from that, we're actually able then to develop a service, or not a service, but a plan, and implement. So what that would then entail is, right, we would need to capacitate these women. We need to make them feel human. We need to acknowledge them. We need to acknowledge their human rights. Because their self-esteem is so low that they literally have to look up to see the ground. And that's the first thing we have to do, is just lift them and let them know that they are not being judged, that they're being held and they're being supported and they're being listened to. We also then support them in terms of some, for financial literacy. We walk a journey with them. So if a project, for instance, is a year, we walk the journey with them for that year, but at the same time, we ensure that there is sustainability being built so that the communities are able to support themselves alongside those sectors of government that we've linked them to. So we would walk that journey for a year, linking them to social economic opportunities, linking them, as I said, to healthcare services, sexual health and HIV, and also teaching them how to reduce the harms that they are doing to their bodies, but through educating, through getting healthcare involved, and also through forming these little networks of support within their various communities, and supporting that and developing them and growing them and empowering them. And the phenomenal thing is that by doing that, they actually do find their voices. They find their voices and they realize that they're important and that they are heard. And what we do concurrently is we then sensitize, as I said, those various sectors, that render those services. So we will sensitize them. We will capacitate them on how, when they are actually working with people who use drugs and alcohol, how to work with compassion, understanding, and what to recognize, for instance, for dehydration, etc., with crystal meth, etc., so signs and then what to do. So it's a very practical side of doing things. And then what we do is we link the two. So once we have set up the initial capacitation and networks of support in the various communities, and they've elected their leaders, we then further capacitate those leaders to grow and develop their networks of support and handhold their women to seeking, and adhering to healthcare. And if there's a case of gender-based violence, they are linked to a social crime prevention officer, that has also been capacitated. So there's a relationship that is then being built with the clinical managers in their communities, with the civil society organizations, the nurses and the healthcare workers in the community, and with the social welfare. There's always a link and a network lead. And that has really, really helped with, on the government sector side, they are reaching a very difficult and hard to reach population group that don't just come out, because of the extent of stigma. And it's proven to be incredibly successful, these personal links and this trust that is then formed and nurtured. And we guide them and we support them and we link them as often as we can to ensure that those relationships remain healthy and that they are developed and that we're able to address challenges together and advocate as well for change, at more sort of senior government levels, which also in terms of Stan's work lead right up to policy reform. So that's on the project side. It's got a lot to do because we've got so much, a very high prevalence of A positive cases, a very, very high prevalence of pregnancies and fetal alcohol syndrome, spectrum disorder, babies being born, many, many teen pregnancies. So it's absolutely critical to be able to link them with the necessary services. And once we have, done this, we are able then to have these women that have largely become abstinent, especially the leaders, because they are given a purpose and they have to attend meetings where they can actually explain how they need things done and what they need in order to support them and to better serve them within their communities. So they then were taught and it's absolutely incredible to see how these women rise and are able then to stand in front of the very people who arrest them and will turn them away from clinic services, telling them to come back when they're clean, that they're dirty. And they are able to stand and say, look, this is me. I'm a human being. These are my network members. And this is what we need. And what do you need from us? How can we change what we're doing to also make your life easier and the service that you render to us easier? So it's really forging a beautiful, healthy relationship. And then, as I say, linking to social economic development opportunities. So that could be working with the municipalities because they would then have various platforms where these, people would be able to register and get, it's very low paying work, but it is work. And we've done a lot of work to destigmatize and allow them the opportunity to also work. But at the same time, we say to them, those of us that work in this world have a responsibility. We've got to turn up. We've got to give it our all. We can't come to work under the influence. We can't fall asleep. We have to, and so it's teaching them a life skill at the same time And then once we've done that side of it, we then advocate, more on a provincial or a national level, and also on a global level, where I am one of the original founders of the World Federation Against Drugs Gender Working Committee, because this is an enormous problem, is that, the stigma attached to women. And so that's the advocacy side of Stan's work. And then we look at the young people. It is very, very sad, Dave, the extent of neglect and violence against children and young people in these communities. So they are severely impoverished. The work is seasonal. And obviously, and I'm quite sure you've heard this, post-COVID, there's been a significant, it's just turned everything upside down. So the links to seasonal work are the only hope that many of them have. And it's only for, a small part of the population group. And then what happens is they are paid a government grant per child. So what they do is they have more babies to get further government grants. And hence the importance of the work that we do to prevent unwanted pregnancies and to prevent the births of fetal alcohol syndrome or spectrum disorder babies. And what we do, and essentially how that whole project and service came about, was we were approached by a few schools in the Cape Winelands region saying they are absolutely desperate. They don't know what to do anymore with regards to the extent of drug and alcohol use and behavior in the schools. And is there any way that we could help them? And so what we did was develop a treatment service, an early intervention and a treatment service, specifically within the context of the rural South African people, because it was very, very important to take into account, the intergenerational trauma, the history, of this country in terms of apartheid and the cultural beliefs and the violence it's just interwoven into these societies. And so what we did was we just put this very comprehensive trauma-informed, evidence-based model together. And we approached the Department of Social Development and we got the treatment registered. Obviously, it needed to comply with the Substance Abuse Act of the National Substance Abuse Act of South Africa, the minimum laws and standards for people to be able to go through the program or through the treatment service. And what we found when we established, and very sadly, we are only able, or were, and I'm going to get to that part, we were only able to put it in one school at a time, but the need to actually do this concurrently in a number of schools was very apparent, but it also gave us the opportunity to pilot and understand in much more depth what the needs of these children were. And what we saw, Dave, was, or gained in terms of the data coming out, from the social workers and, the counselors working with these children, is the level of trauma and violence that these children are exposed to and how they are using drugs and alcohol to escape this. It is that extent of trauma and the atrocities, I can't go into in depth. It's too much, but it's trauma. And what we understood is there is no ways that a pure early intervention of teaching them about the harms, teaching them life skills, ensuring that they are linked to the relevant support services, which is the required minimum norm and standard of an early intervention treatment plan. It was not and is not going to work for them. They need trauma therapy. And then they need to be linked to the relevant areas of support within the system. And once these children actually started to be held in a professional therapeutic environment, their behavior changed. The teachers and the headmaster kept approaching our therapy team and saying that it is phenomenal to see how the children's behavior has actually changed, how the anger has left them, and how they are, what is the word I'm looking for? Their appearance, taking pride in their appearance, and the attendance at school was just so much better. And that's the need for this type of intervention in a school setting. It is so important. And very sadly, and I know I'm talking all over the place, Dave, and you're probably going to have to do so much editing to, just to sort of piece this all. But essentially, we tried very, very hard to get the producers, the farm owners and the producers and businesses and, everybody behind it. But the minute that they hear there's drugs involved, they run away. And so, very sadly, we had to suspend those services. And, in my eyes, that is the worst thing that you can do, is implement a service in a community and then have to remove it. And when I spoke at the Africa Drug Policy Week, and I spoke about this specific thing, I spoke about the early intervention, I spoke about, the woman and how we work in terms of reducing harms. I had the Deputy Minister of Social Development approach me and say, I had no idea that this is what harm reduction entails. I really believed it was only to do with NSP programs and OST programs, etc. And this really could be used as a model within the South African context. But very sadly, very few of these things come to fruition. But what it did do was it turned on a light. It turned on a light in terms of what does harm reduction mean within the context of our work, and how do we implement that? And essentially, it is reducing harms on every single sphere. So if a child needs to be linked to child protection services, or the perpetrator of family violence needs to be removed because of the extent of violence taking place in a specific household, the social workers are able to do that. And hence the fact, that it has to be a registered program, that there has to be statutory services involved. And just because people are poor, Dave, does not mean that they need to have substandard services. And this is the difficult thing for people to actually grasp in terms of the work. What we're needing is is support, is partnership. And what we're getting is, charity and, a sense of saviorism. And this is not what it's about. These children are at severe risk. And some of them sadly, have been significantly damaged in the process. And they need to be linked to support and services. They need to be removed because many of the mothers and fathers are also, they're also way past, dangerous using. They're actually in progressed addiction, largely absent fathers as well, and it's woman-headed or child-headed households. And there's so much support. There's so much support that is needed. And as I said, very, very few resources. So in Dan's work, it really does kind of, go into all sorts of spheres and avenues to try to get partnership with government, with civil society, with society at large, educators, anybody that actually has some compassion for people, for humanity. And that's essentially the work of Stan. So it's really on many, many tiers.
I'm curious how you would not even define, but articulate what harm reduction is if you had, say, 30 seconds to tell somebody about it. They don't have any background or context related to it. But what would be your short little spiel to say, hey, this is what harm reduction is?
Great. So harm reduction is reducing harms to drug and alcohol dependent people and walking a path with them to abstinence and reducing harms along the way.
And if you were to then say where the magic, the power, the impacts really come from with harm reduction, what would you say?
Compassion, non-judgment, seeing the person, not the substance, looking at that person as a human being with compassion and with love and with a will to help them, give them a leg up, and do no harm to them. Do no harm. There's no harm in helping.
I wonder too, before we start to wind down our conversation, do you have I'll call it a success story, a fun highlight, whether it be one of the women or youth, or even just one of the projects that you could share with our listeners?
Oh, there's some beautiful stories, Dave. Wow, there really are some beautiful stories. And I think, if I can take one, and that is of a woman that we worked with in a recent project. And I think that's probably why it's springing to mind. This woman was severely beaten, traumatized, and addicted. She was pushed away, turned away by her community, and she was very ill with HIV. And somehow the healthcare workers managed to reach her, and she came to our focus group. And through the process, she was elected a leader. There was some strength that her community saw in her, and she was elected a leader of her network. And this lady, we started with her at the end of January this year. since March, she has been completely abstinent. She has started her own car wash little business. She has won funding with her little business plan and her budget, which she was taught how to put together. And she won the competition and she got a very, very small amount to start her little car wash business, which no one else was doing in her community. And the community really got behind her. And people were bringing their camper vans and, their big Land Rovers. And it was just the most beautiful thing to see. She obviously made the decision to leave her husband because he just wanted to continue using, and she just could not live in that environment. So she decided, she was no longer using. She's been abstinent. She's still abstinent. She's still running her car wash business. And she is linked and is able to speak on these platforms. And she's going to become an ambassador for the Department of Social Development for the gender-based violence program, which, they are launching provincially. And that is a beautiful success story from somebody that just had no hope, Dave, to realizing who she was, that she had a voice, and just how powerful that voice is, and how she can move people within her community to actually also get active and get excited about working and being, entrepreneurial and finding her voice. And it's, if I look at the beginning of the year footage of her and I look at her now, I don't recognize her. And I mean that in the most beautiful, beautiful, positive way.
I love it. And I know you have a long list of similar, just as beautiful stories that we could go into, but we're right around that hour mark. So I want to just bring one last question to you before we close out this conversation. And that question is, if you were to tell our listeners, if you were going to remember one thing from this episode, remember this, what would that be?
If you are able to step back and observe quietly with kindness, you are able to see so much more. You're able to understand so much more. You're able to listen so much more.
Such beautiful, beautiful wisdom. And I wonder, what might be a call to action for our listeners that you would offer?
Is to please get involved with Stand. Please support our work. It is desperately needed. And please connect with us on our various social media platforms. I'm sure Dave will share, and you'll be able to see the extent of our work. And we really cannot do this without your support.
And with that last bit of wisdom, I will yet again thank you so much for this beautiful conversation that you've shared with me and with the world, and for going all in on being you and doing what you do. I look forward to more stories, more conversations with you, and to continue to grow our friendship as well, because together is absolutely better.
Dave, thank you so much. I have such enormous gratitude for this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you.
And listeners, check the show notes for links to Stan's website and all of their social media, ways you can get connected, stay up to date, and help everybody grow, learn, and heal together. That concludes this episode. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and share this episode with a friend before you leave. And we look forward to seeing you on social media, because prevention is better together. Together, we are stronger.